Hello, everyone. A very good evening to you all. I hope that you all are keeping safe during these difficult times that we are going through. And we are glad to have with us today Siddharth Luthra, sir, who all we know very well. He has been the Additional Solicitor General of India. He is a designated senior lawyer. He has been appearing in multiple criminal matters, writ matters, rights issues matters, and we have been hearing about him through our judgments that we keep reading. With your permission, sir, I'll now start the session and will request you to, sir, please address the audience.
My apologies. You don't need to put your mask, that's the cough, because my throat is dry. Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here on a hot Sunday afternoon. So I do hope you're sitting in the comfort of your own homes and are not traipsing about. Puneet has asked me to speak about an area of my interest, a topic which I particularly relish because of my interest in the area of white-collar crime. And that is the liability of directors and key managerial personnel for offenses by companies. You know, I don't know if you've looked into the theory behind the forming of corporations. Individuals used to do trade and business, and in our part of the world, especially from West Asia to China, there was always trade done on an individual basis. And as time changed, trade increased. The question was, how would you expand this trade? So that gave rise to partnerships and the corporate structure. And the issue really was, to start with, is the corporate structure distinct than that from the individual? And you will see in Salomon versus Solomon in 1897, the English courts Court of Appeal recognizes for the first time that there is a distinction between the company's existence and that of the individuals, the members, or the shareholders. Preet, are you running the PPT along with this?
Yes, sir. As you say, it will be shared right now.
If you want, you can share it now, or you can give it to them later. Either which way it works for me.
So we'll leave it to you, whatever you say. You can share it with them later.
Yeah, okay. Do it like that. That may be a little more easier because that way the flow will be a little better, I guess.
Great.
In certain situations, the corporate structure can be unveiled or opened, and that's called lifting of the corporate veil to understand who are the people behind the company. Those of you who practice company law would have heard of this concept time and again, but the lifting of the corporate veil does not happen. And even today, the Supreme Court is seized with this argument in the Bhopal gas case. In the Bhopal gas case, there is an attempt to impose liability on the companies, not the Indian company UCIL alone, but UCC, the foreign company, as also the company which has acquired UCC. All of this is sought to be done under the guise of lifting of corporate will, and the argument is that you can't lift the corporate will beyond individuals, and the concept of corporate will is being discussed. Now, so far as criminal liability is concerned, which is what I'm going to speak about today, criminal liability shifts in two directions. One is, when you look at the corporation, you're looking at the persons who are the governing mind, the thinking personnel behind the corporations. And in this regard, there's a very classic decision which you may want to look at. It's part of the PPT. That's when the company is liable for the criminal acts of the natural person that run it. So when individuals commits act, the company is also going to be liable, because the company can't function by itself, as we all understand. It needs natural persons. Now, this concept is settled in a beautiful decision called JK Industries versus Chief Inspector of Factories and Boilers, 96-5 SCC 665. Why this decision is important is because it looked into the English law, Tesco, Bolton, it looked into the English law on the subject to determine the expansion of liability in such cases. And in that case, the question was, there was an amendment to the Factories Act. And when the amendment took place, the point was whether the nominee of the company under the Factories Act could only be the director or could be somebody else. And there they said it needs to be the director, because it's the director who's going to be liable for this. So that is a very important landmark decision in the development of criminal liability of directors and officers in charge and responsible. Subsequently, in 2003, you had that classic case of Veliappa Textiles. Now, Veliappa was a very interesting case, income tax case, Assistant Commissioner versus Veliappa Textiles. And again, the concept of alter ego was discussed. And what was held finally was that a company cannot be prosecuted when there is imprisonment and fine, because company is not a natural person. If you can't imprison it, you can't impose. How can you convict or prosecute the company? Of course, this decision was overturned later in the Standard Chartered 2005 decision, the Constitution Bench, and they said a company can't be prosecuted, can be convicted for its agents, even if there is mandatory sentence and fine, mandatory custodial sentence and fine, because what was important and what was held in that case was, if it's a company, you will not impose the mandatory sentence, you will only impose the fine, and Veliappa is diluted, set aside, overruled in that extent. The next landmark that came about was a very interesting decision on mens rea. Whether a company can be said, if the company is not a natural person, can it commit mens rea offenses? And in Iridium, in 2011, Volume 1 SCC, page 74, it was held that a company, Iridium versus Motorola, it was held that a company can be prosecuted for mens rea offenses. There's, of course, I would recommend a very nice decision of Justice Iqbal Ansari of the Guwahati High Court. This relates to the company Samsung. I would recommend you read it. It has an entire history of the development of the law in relation to mens rea and mens rea offenses, a very important decision. The law then develops through Sunil Mittal. Now, Sunil Bharti Mittal, if you recall correctly, was a landmark case. And why was it an important case? Because Sunil Mittal was part of the additional spectrum, 2G additional spectrum. And in the additional spectrum offshoot of the original 2G cases, the companies were sought to be prosecuted without prosecuting the individual directors or the persons in charge. The special judge took a view that that was not appropriate, issued summons, matter went straight to the Supreme Court, because as you all know, all those cases could not go to the High Court, depriving the lawyers in the High Court of a lot of work. And you could only go to the Supreme Court. And eventually a 3-judges bench of the Supreme Court decided that, went deep into the issue of liability, and in fact dwells a lot more on vicarious liability provisions. Please note, there was no vicarious liability provision involved. There was only the IPC and the Prevention of Corruption Act. There was nothing there was no statutory provision like 141 of the Negotiable Instruments Act. Yet the court went into that entire theory, and the 3-judges bench, I believe Justice Sikri wrote the decision, he took a view that these two persons, Sunil Mittal and the Vodafone people, could not be prosecuted, because his view was that these people, there's no role attributable to them. Of course, we must remember that in the criminal law, vicarious liability is an exception and is only applicable when statutes impute this liability. Under the Indian Penal Code, which is our parent legislation for criminal law, and many statutes which do not have vicarious liability provisions, we take reliance to, if you want to prosecute individuals who are not direct offenders. So that is to say, if A is committing the act of cheating, but B is providing the pens or the computers for it, A will be prosecuted for cheating or for forgery, but B will be either an abettor or be liable by common intention or knowledge, or even conspiracy. And the relevant provisions in this regard for vicarious liability in the IPCR, sections 34 to 38, common intention, knowledge, partly doing of an act, they're very important. You will find most of the law on section 34 and very little on 35, 37, 36, 38, which are also very important provisions. Then you have the abetment provisions 107 onwards. You have conspiracy 120A and 120B. And you have 141 to 149, which is common object. Now, these 141 to 149 are really not relevant for commercial crime because it's unlawful assembly related. They are relation to hurt crimes. But as a matter of completeness, I thought I must mention it to you. In the context of statutes such as the IPC, where there is no vicarious liability provision, you require individual liability. You require to address and see, does the person have a role or not? If the person does not have a role, you can't prosecute them. So you have to look at individual culpability. There's a classic decision which I would recommend to all of you, which is Maqsood Sayyed versus State of Gujarat, 2008, 5 SC 668. And I'll just read a line which I like. And I quote, vicarious liability of the managing director and director would arise provided any provision exists in that behalf in the statute. Full stop. Statutes indisputably must contain provisions fixing such vicarious liabilities. So most statutes will look at act or omission because they don't have a vicarious liability provision. So they look at specific culpability or liability. And therefore, what we need to see is there sufficient evidence of an active role and coupled with the criminal intent? One of the recent decisions on vicarious liability of directors is a case which I had happened to argue, Shiv Kumar Jatia versus State of NCT Delhi, a very interesting case. 2019 SCC Online SC 1090. Those of you who are from Delhi would know there is a well-known hotel called the Hyatt Regency on the Ring Road at Bikaji Kama Place. Now at the Hyatt Regency, there was a young man who visited one day, and as young men are apt to do, he got a little careless. He was in the company of some friends and he got a little careless and he decided to walk on the parapet. Now, walking on the parapet on the 6th floor is not necessarily the wisest idea, even if there's some fencing. Tragically, he fell down, he received injuries, and it's an unfortunate tragedy. And the family wanted to prosecute not only the persons who were at the hotel that day, but also the managing director of the company which ran the hotel. The general manager was also prosecuted. Now, for the managing director, we had contended this. We lost in the High Court. We were remanded back. We went to the Supreme Court. And our contention, which we discovered was during the course of the hearing, that the gentleman had not been in Delhi at the time the incident took place. He was overseas. So if he's not in India, how could he be held liable for rashness or negligence in A, ensuring that the man didn't climb on the parapet, B, in ensuring that the injured was rushed to hospital, which according to the family he was not rushed in time. So these liabilities could not be imputed on him unless there was a statutory liability. We succeeded finally in the Supreme Court. It took a lot of hearings, some 200 plus hearings in the High Court and many in the Supreme Court. Yes, the matter was actually, Puneet, heard before about 4 benches, and Supreme Court gave 3 orders for hearing. The other side was contentious. Gentleman happens to be a friend of mine. I was also emotionally committed to it. So 200 plus hearings, and we finally got the case quashed as against him, not against the general manager. And the Supreme Court holds there, and I quote, an individual, either as a director or a managing director or chairman of the company, can be made and accused along with the company only if there is sufficient material to prove his active role coupled with criminal intent, the words I just used for you. Now, please remember, he's the managing director. But here, because it was a hotel and judges realized that he's a managing director of the company, but all hotels are run by general managers. And for the sake of permissions for running the hotel, for safety certificates, fire certificates, they have necessary permissions which are granted in the name of specified individuals by statute. That was so far as the IPC aspect is concerned. The reason I'm mentioning this is for the sake of completeness, because this will become relevant to us when we look at liability further, because under the Companies Act, though there is a concept of officer in default and key managerial person, it also uses the word any person. And in a series of prosecutions which have been launched, some of which I'm doing, I have found that not only are Companies Act provisions being invoked, but a plethora of IPC provisions are invoked to make it punishable with life imprisonment and so on and so forth, and to increase the gravity of the offense. So please remember, within the IPC, there are cheating, fraud, breach of trust provisions. They are invariably invoked in the case of fraud in relation to companies, and people can be held liable. What is important here is what is going to be tested sooner or later is whether, with the coming in of the definition of fraud under 447 of the Companies Act, which is extremely wide, whether the IPC provisions of cheating and others can be at all used. So that's a matter which will be tested in the court, but it's important. One more thing I must say, there's a development in the law, and I had occasion to assist the court in this matter. It's called Sharad Kumar Sanghi versus Sangeeta Rane, 2015, 12 SCC 781. Again, a case of lack of liability, lack of role, but more important, a passing line, if I recall correctly, in para 12, which says, if the company is not prosecuted, you can't prosecute the individuals. This, according to me, is the only decision of the Supreme Court of cases where company not prosecuted, but directors prosecuted will not be sustainable. And this jurisprudence will have to develop, because whether that principle applies to IPC or not, I must also add that in the context of the Companies Act now, there is a specific provision that when there is amalgamation or merger, that is where the company ceases to exist and cannot be prosecuted, the provision now permits prosecution of individual directors, which I will deal with a little later. Now let's come to vicarious liability provisions. And the reason I'm taking you through this history of vicarious liability provisions is because, according to me, the stage was set for prosecution of whether directors of a company, officials of a company. In fact, the term uses persons in charge and responsible of a company. So that category of persons, whether for a firm, company, trust, or society, can be prosecuted if there is a vicarious liability provision. To my recollection, the oldest such provision that I've come across is Section 15 of the Official Secrets Act 1923. You have also 278B Income Tax Act, 141 Negotiable Instruments Act, which has kept all of us lawyers very busy in every court, 48 Competition Act, Section 10 of the new Prevention of Corruption Act, now amended, which was introduced, Section 70 of the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. And I must tell you, barring the Companies Act, which has used which has modified its old definition, these statutes with vicarious liability provisions all use a standardized language, and you can almost, if you read one, you can read the other. They're pari materia, and from 1923, which also shows that those who are drafting our legislations are perhaps not being so creative or not kept up with the changes in law overseas. The first part of such provisions is liability by status. So the liability is by virtue of being in charge or responsible. In SMS Pharma versus Neeta Bhalla, it's been held that managing directors will be responsible. Other persons who have a specific role will be responsible. For example, the CEO may be responsible, but not necessarily the chairman. The proviso to such clauses permits a person to plead in the defense due diligence or lack of knowledge. Now, these due diligence or lack of knowledge are very important for us in the context of the Companies Act, and I'm going to come up to that in a moment. The second part creates liability, culpability. If the individual has consented, connived, or the act is attributable to any neglect on the part of the individual. Some statutes, of course, now provide exceptions for nominees. Let's say for government directors in 149.12, you have independent and nominated nominee directors have an exemption. 141.2 in the Negotiable Instruments Act as amended is an exemption clause for government directors. But those, as I said, are exceptional clauses which have been provided in some case. Under the PFA, you have the provision of being able to nominate somebody who will face the prosecution instead of the directors. Now let's come to this very important part in the second part of today's piece, which is key managerial person. If you recall the old Companies Act, the 1956 Companies Act, there was an earlier Companies Act, but I will not call it the old Companies Act because the only one I knew as a lawyer, young lawyer, was the 1956 Act. The prior act is something which I've barely looked at, only as a matter of theory, because we've not had to deal with cases under that. So in that act, there was a concept called officers in default, I believe section 5, if I'm not mistaken. There was felt a problem in the Companies Act because what was happening was that when individuals would make breaches of the law, prosecutions would be lodged across the entire board of directors. And though the term officers in default was specified, everybody was being prosecuted. And there was an interpretation in the context of the Negotiable Instruments Act in V.K. Vora versus K.K. Ahuja, if I'm not mistaken, 2009 as I recall it. You can verify that one. That's one I told you from memory, where they used the provisions of the Companies Act to dilute the liability of directors under the Negotiable Instruments Act to say that everybody should not be responsible. Therefore, when the Companies Act was being drafted, two things were happening parallelly, and it's a very interesting development in the law. On the one hand, the Companies Act in 2013 chooses to make a plethora of offenses culpable with either punishment of penalty or fine or imprisonment or both. That is, there's a mandatory imprisonment. Now, this is a big problem. This created a new issue. And if you see the Companies Act, after every few provisions, you'll find criminal culpability. Either it's penalty, which is civil culpability, or fine. Now, fine can only be by criminal prosecution, criminal action. So there is, of course, a move to dilute it now in 2020. So therefore, the lawmakers were very conscious that they should not expose every person who's a director to prosecution. In fact, under the 1956 Act, there were departmental circulars that came out from Ministry of Corporate Affairs to say, and those circulars were considered by courts to determine liability because the problem was, otherwise everybody who became a director would be liable. Government nominees are there in companies, they would be made liable. Bank nominees are there in companies, they would be made liable. Professionals, lawyers like you and us could be made liable. There was one provision, 633 under the old Companies Act, which is an exemption clause, but I only know one case in my career that I've read, where a lawyer got an exemption from prosecution of all Companies Act and non-Companies Act, that's IPC of prosecutions, and that is the case of Mr. Om Prakash Khaitan. It's an old case, Om Prakash Khaitan versus Arusi, as I recall correctly. That's the only one single bench. I believe Delhi High Court, I don't recall. I think it's Delhi High Court, long, long ago. But that was an exception to the rule. 633 only limited to protection for Companies Act offences and not beyond. Secondly, since there was a move to enhance the punishment and increase the criminal impact, one thing we must remember that in India, our lawmakers have, as I believe, for the last about 50 years, a philosophy. If something needs to be dealt with, there is a concern by society about something, just put it as a criminal prosecution. Let the criminal courts deal with it. Society will be happy. People will feel that the government or the administration has done something. And the courts will sort out their problems. And the result of that is that at the trial courts where I had practiced for a fair part of my life, and I do visit occasionally still, there has been an overburdening of criminal legislation, and that is becoming a chaotic situation. Of course, it keeps appellate lawyers very busy, so I'm sure nobody's going to be complaining much. Now, 2 subsection 51 of section 2 of the Companies Act defines key managerial person. These are, of course, dealt with in a separate chapter, section 203 onwards. It's number 1, the chief executive officer or the managing director or the manager, the company secretary, the whole-time director, the chief financial officer, and such other officer as may be prescribed. Very important that the company secretary is being added in the CFO. And please note, only whole-time directors are there. Under the old act, we used to keep pleading, we're not a whole-time director. That argument used to be accepted by courts, but not always, and it went on and on. But now there is a clarification. We must not read key managerial person independent of the definition of officer who's in default, and that is in section 2, subsection 60 of the Act, which means whole-time director includes key managerial person. When there is no KMP, as we will call it, any person who's given his consent to act as per the direction of the board, really people who act as an executive position if there's no directive. So, you have companies which have CEOs, board of directors and a CEO, not necessarily an MD. And people who are given specific or general authority by the board to carry out the executive affairs can all be liable. And they are the persons who are executing the actions on behalf of the board of directors. So all such persons will be treated as officers in default. Of course, in the context of transfer of shares, share transfer agents, registrars, merchant bankers to the issue or transfer, they also fall within the terms officer in default. Now, as I said, the Companies Act provides 4 kinds of actions: penalty, fine, imprisonment of fine, and mandatory imprisonment and fine. This lot of prosecutions can apply to, in some cases, the provisions will read the word every person. So every person can be prosecuted, which includes KMPs. At some places, the Companies Act prosecuting provisions will use the word any person. In another place, they'll use KMPs, and some place officers or officers who is in default, and even auditors, etc., as the case may be, CFOs. So there are specific liabilities for some specific provisions. And today, when I look through the Companies Act again, and I'm grateful to Puneet, I spent some time revisiting the Act, and it's been, as always, a great learning. There are a number of provisions which create liability where you have the ability to prove your innocence, whereas there are others where it's a strict liability provision. So, for example, just illustratively, Section 26, which deals with prospectors, 36, which deals with persons inducing people to invest money, 38 for personation for acquisition of securities, 34 for liability for misstatements and prospectus, 35 for misstatements, again, civil liability, 57 punishment for personation, 339 liability for fraudulent conduct, and 447 to 449 for fraud, false statement, false evidence. All of these use the term person. This is not limited to KMPs alone. Then you have Chapter 5, which includes sections 73 to 76A, dealing with acceptance of deposits, which deals with the term every officer in default. Further, as I said, there are strict liability offenses. So, for example, Section 129, which deals with financial statements where there is a breach in filing, there will be a prosecution the moment there's a breach, unless you can show there is no breach. The fact of the breach means liability is almost automatic for the persons described therein. No exemption unless you can show that there is a malicious prosecution or there's a technical breach in the prosecution, absence of sanction or absence of permission. There are other offenses under the Act which are a little distinct, which are, for example, 34, 36, 34 being criminal liability for misstatements in prospectus, and 36. Now, these are provisions where there is an opportunity to show lack of knowledge, due diligence, or absence of mens rea. All of these are very important because here you have the right to say, even as a KMP, that this could not be within my domain, or I exercise due diligence and yet somebody else did it. Because in some provisions under the Companies Act, and I'm not going to get into that much detail, keeping in view the time constraint, there are multiple personnel in the KMP category who will have a liability. So for example, a CFO can say the board, or the board can say the CFO never told us. The MD can say the CFO never disclosed these facts to me. And he can then shift the liability. But that creates a very tricky situation because it's not that the liability is not there in the company, but the question is who's liable, and then it really becomes a case of saving your own skin. The Companies Act provides one very important exemption, which is under section 149 of the Act, which is another advance in Indian company law, and it's very important because prior to this, as I said, we used to rely on government circulars, we used to rely on court decisions. And here it says that when KMPs have acted diligently, so it talks about, and what is important for us is 149(12), that independent directors, non-executive directors not being promoters of KMPs can be held liable only in respect of omission or commission which had occurred with knowledge attributable through broad processes and consent or connivance, or where he or she had not acted diligently. So even independent directors and non-executive directors, though they have an exemption, but if they have had an active role, equivalent to what I said earlier, the second part of most standardized vicarious liability provisions, then you can't escape liability. And that becomes a catch. It also has to be proved by the company. And I'll tell you what this has led to. The plethora of these prosecutions has led to this plethora of these criminal provisions, in fact, has led to a situation where you have as many as 287 accused in a criminal case. In the Bhushan Steel's case, where I'm appearing for them, I've appeared for them in all three courts, there are 287 accused. It's taken 6 months to just make all the accused appear. And the courtroom is the size of, in Supreme Court, one of the courts at the rear, so perhaps not the triangulated courts, but one of the, as the old courts used to be, court 6, let's say, court 8 or 9 now, 6 or 8 or 9. If it's the size of that court, imagine can 287 people with 287 lawyers appear in such a room at one time? Well, COVID has ensured that social distancing is going to make sure that the trial doesn't go on for a while. Okay. 149 has been effectively used by the Delhi High Court in a case called KP Balaraj 2017 2 DLT Criminal 695 in Bharadwaj. In both cases, we had argued for independent directors. I'd argued for independent directors and the prosecution was quashed. This matter is currently pending in the Supreme Court. We got notice issued from Justice Naveen Sinha a few months back, notice and stay, that in terms of 149, you can't prosecute independent directors or nominee directors of financial institutions. In March 2020, the Companies Bill was introduced in the Lok Sabha. Now, what does this seek to do? A, it seeks to decriminalize certain provisions and therefore take them from the ambit of criminal law to civil law, which is very important. So section 48, 59, 66. It removes imprisonment as a form of punishment, reduces the fine, reduces the imprisonment. So these are various mechanisms that have evolved in such cases to try and reduce the liability. But the problem is, what do you do when you're faced with such a prosecution? When you're faced with such a prosecution, you then have to examine and see how are you going to escape it. So one of the most important things that I find is that companies need to work hard at developing systems and creating awareness for its employees as to the number of criminal and civil liabilities that are now applicable under the Companies Act, because there are so many, there has to be an exercise of great diligence, not just due diligence, to ensure that you don't face liability. There are compliance regimes which have to be put in place to ensure that no breaches are made. There has to be a coherent litigation policy. And even despite that, if there is a prosecution, then it is important for all such clients to seek the advice, not just of a person practicing criminal law, but a person who understands commerce. Because this is really this is an interface between Companies Act, and not only Companies Act, between corporate liability and criminal law. I remember there was a tradition that the traditional criminal lawyers, if you ask them, they would say our IPC exists. Our IPC has 5 sections in it. And when you would ask them what, he says, well, it begins at 299 and ends at 304. We don't have any other provision in our IPC. But today, with the increase in white-collar crime and criminal liability, because the issue is not just about Companies Act, in understanding and developing Companies Act, we have to understand the fraud, breach of trust provisions and its impact, the Companies Act impact on those provisions and their interface, and also see that there are going to be other legislation. For example, SEBI. There is an interplay between SEBI and Companies Act as well, especially in the context of insider information. Both are prosecutable offenses in both legislations. So that interface and that understanding comes from a commercial understanding and commercial background. Secondly, you must also not run away from the investigating agencies, because please remember, the SFIO, which investigates offences under this Act, has to do so in a specified time frame. And if you do not cooperate or you're seen as evading, arrest is going to follow. Arrest may also follow in other circumstances, but arrest is definitely likely to follow. If you are able to show during the investigation itself that there is no culpability, that there is exculpatory material, then you'll get away with the exculpatory material. But you have to place that up front. You know, there may be cases of mistakes, mistaken information that lands up, or malicious information that lands up with the investigating agency. At that point, and please also understand, the SFIO is a new body. It was originally not having statutory status. It was only issued in terms of a government notification by the Companies Act. It was just authorized under the Companies Act by government notification. Today, it is an agency which is statutorily recognized. And therefore, they're also learning the ropes and understanding what the law is. While responding to such prosecutions, we must be very careful that we must ensure that we must comply, and ensure that when we comply with a demand for documents or for information, we scrutinize that before it's supplied. We don't just provide it in a raw form where it is apt to be misunderstood or misinterpreted. And documents as well must be supplied after due analysis. This is important because in cases such as 447, there is an applicability of the twin conditions under section 212 of the Companies Act. The twin conditions are very dangerous. It means that a person in charge and responsible, that a person who is arrested cannot be released unless you prima facie show your innocence. And this 212 is being tested in the Supreme Court right now in a number of cases. But let me tell you, the impact is that it's equivalent to the section 37 of the NDPS Act. In the context of PMLA, the restrictive twin conditions of bail have been quashed, but the challenge in Companies Act is pending. Until then, if a person ever gets arrested, the likelihood of bail is a remote possibility, unless you have the best of cases. Of course, medical grounds and others have some scope, but they are limited grounds. And I must tell you, in one of the cases that I'm doing, the accused were not arrested. We were so sure that once they appeared in the trial court, they would be taken into custody. We had to move the High Court, get a protection order of anticipatory bail, limited anticipatory bail, and then we went to the trial courts. Otherwise, there would have been straight custody for these people who have not been arrested during investigation, and though they've not been arrested, there would be a serious problem. So in some of these cases, as I said, if you have 200 plus accused, only some are KMPs. But now even CFOs, auditors are also KMPs. Everybody is being prosecuted. It's not just the person in the management of the company, but ancillary people as well, because this law, as I said, is very open. So cooperate to avoid arrest, but do not give up your Article 20 rights. Because if you start recording statements which are inculpatory, then it'll be very difficult to come out. Remember, the prosecution under the Companies Act now is a peculiar hybrid of a prosecution by non-police officers who are at the same time filing what is known as, what is equivalent to a police report or a charge sheet. There is another peculiar situation that arises for the KMPs. As I said, how do you provide representation for them? Can the company and the KMPs all be represented by the same set of lawyers? Well, not always. Because if there are varying stands or varying defenses between interests between parties, you will have to have different people representing them, because there's a different defense that is to put, otherwise there's going to be a conflict of interest. Of course, where there is no conflict of interest, they can have one representation. Similarly, independent directors, nominee directors ought to have separate representation, because their case is exempted under 149 and they stand on a class apart from KMPs. And lastly, and I'm going to just sum up by saying, you remember I started by saying that in Sharad Kumar Sanghi, they said, company not prosecuted, individuals can't be prosecuted. Well, that principle applies in Anita Hada, in Sharad Kumar Sanghi and Himanshu Chakravarti. But please note, in cases of amalgamation or merger, where the company does not exist, individuals can still be prosecuted for acts of malfeasance under the Companies Act. And that is the new exemption or the category that is being brought up. And therefore, Anita Hada, Sharad Sanghi, Himanshu's case do not apply in entirety to Companies Act. And that's the distinction. It's a very important distinction, especially for KMPs. With that, I'm going to end the talk and I'm going to leave the floor open for any questions.
So thank you so much for the valuable inputs and important aspects which are to be taken care by the KMPs, the directors, and other professionals who are acting within the company on instructions or off instructions. So we have few questions. So the participants have sent us on the chat.
Perfect.
We need to raise it to you so that it can be responded and they can receive the response from you.
They are welcome. You're welcome to raise it to you, and I will try and respond it. But if I can't, you'll have to give me an exemption. I'm on lockdown.
Unlikely that you will not, sir. So one of the questions that has come up is there are these investment agreements. There are shareholder agreements pursuant thereto. So there are nominee directors appointed on behalf of the investors. What is their status when it comes to prosecution of the company in which they are nominated as investor directors?
Sorry, come again. I missed the last part.
So what is their status in terms of prosecution when it comes to prosecution of the company where they are nominated by the investors
again,
and directors?
Yeah. So nominee directors have, again, if you look at 149.12, which I read to you, 149.12 specifically applies, and if you, I'll just give me a minute, I'll just tell you. It specifically applies to such a situation because the problem that you have is people who have come in, as you rightly said, as nominees, why should they be prosecuted for any purpose? So 149, one moment.
So if you permit, we can just quickly run your PPT as well for the audience.
You can, no, I'll just take a minute. I'll just tell you, if you will just see, if you will just look at 149 and you can see that for a moment, it provides an exemption for independent directors under subsection 6. So what happens is there are independent directors and there are nominee directors. Both of them are going to stand on a different footing and they will be able to seek protection. I think that's 148. The only problem that you're going to face is that if the independent or nominee directors, the case may be, because in such cases the nominee directors, if they are involved in the affairs of the company, if they have consented, if they are aware of what is happening, if they have participated in board processes, then they will have to show their innocence. But that is where the liability comes in. And that is why the word used is, notwithstanding anything contained in this act, an independent director, a non-executive director not being a promoter or a key managerial person shall be liable only in respect of such acts or omission or commission which had incurred with his knowledge, attributable through board processes, and with consent or connivance or way he did not act diligently. So that's the norm that's going to apply to nominees. Because
So
nominees by, sorry.
the difference would be in terms of whether they have to face the trial or they get a quashing.
Yes, yes. And one more important thing. We must keep in mind that there will be nominee directors of institutions or investors who have an executive role. This exemption is not for them. Some companies operate on the principle that we put in 3 directors, you put in 3 directors, and we will run the company together. Now that is a different principle when they're whole-time directors completely involved. But if there's a nominee who is only looking after the affairs, for example, like let's say a financial corporation puts in a nominee, their role is only, or LIC puts in a nominee on boards of companies. That's a different category. Or if you're hired, let's say you or me as a lawyer.
So there is a follow-up question. I think the answer is already there, which you have given. In cases of prosecution under Negotiable Instruments Act, in cases of independent directors, they are immune from that prosecution?
KP Balraj is the answer. The High Court decision and the Supreme Court order. I'll share that order with you. The matter is pending in Supreme Court because that's a case. I think it came from Jharkhand or Patna. We are testing that. But Delhi High Court, I believe, in the chat, you've also put up the citation.
And apparently there is a Gujarat High Court judgment, which is the only one-page judgment which says independent directors proceeding can be quashed.
Yes.
So there's a
and the High Courts have taken a view. The High Courts have taken a view. Not only Gujarat, another High Court has taken a view, but we need this matter settled by Supreme Court, and that's the reason we got notice and stay in that case, and we are hopeful we'll succeed.
Right. So in cases where the punishment for fraud, if the company is protected, there's a question, are KMPs individually liable to pay up the fine?
I'm sorry, the question
So
is
in
not.
cases of prosecution of a company and the KMPs, can KMPs be made individually liable to pay fine?
The fine is also payable on KMPs. The word uses every person in charge and responsible. Look, I'll tell you, there's a little catch here. If you're talking about fraud, then fraud is defined under 447 of the Act. Fraud talks about any person. Look at the definition of fraud under 447. It's in the widest possible terms. But let's look at 2 classes. One is fraud, which is the general provision. So there are provisions which will use the word any person. If it's any person, then it's whether fine is imposed on you or not. Then there are provisions which have statutory liability, which says that every person and every officer in default. Now, fine can be imposed on the officer in default also or not. That is the discretion of the court as to how the fine is to be imposed collaterally. If the fine, in some cases, courts find that they impose a nominal fine on the company, but the majority fine on the company, realizing that the collection is to be done from the company. So that is a matter of discretion of the court purely, but it's legitimate and legally possible.
So in what kind of cases or these KMPs usually, what is the exculpatory material in such kind of prosecutions that KMPs can, keep to protect their interests, bring forth? For instance, where there are internal communications, those can be brought on record or some other method?
Look, I'll tell you the difficulty that we face for KMPs is their role is an executive role. So so as there are going to be two classes of cases. One class of cases which is effectively strict liability with no mens rea. So there is no question of coming out, because if the offense is complete, then the punishment will follow. Either you prove there is no offense, or there is an absence of permission or sanction, as the case may be, or some other technical defect. Unless that happens, then you have another class of case, and that's the class of case where you get in, where mens rea provisions come in. So when mens rea provisions come in, you will then have to establish the absence of your role or mens rea, or the absence of knowledge about the commission of the offense. As I said, within the same provision, there are different sets of liabilities imposed on different people. So for example, if the CFO, as I said earlier, does not put something up to the board, the MD can say it was not within my knowledge. Or the MD has hidden it from the other whole-time directors. Or supposing there is a case of related party transactions which is not disclosed to the board. So while the company may be prosecuted, the other directors can say this was never brought to our notice. And despite the exercise of due diligence, we could not have known that this was a related party transaction. Because remember one thing, in certain offenses, if under the Companies Act, not only are you liable, but if you have had a specific role or a benefit, then your culpability is not only under the standardized provisions where others are prosecuted, but also under 447. So there is a deemed prosecution under 447.
Thank you,
which
sir.
is a much more stringent offense.
So also there's a question which says, in cases of offences having been committed in past, and there's a new appointment of a director in future, and can they be made liable for the offences of the companies in past? For instance, a dishonor of a check, just for instance. There are checks issued in past, dishonored, but the director is appointed, say, today and prosecuted tomorrow.
So I'll deal with the 138 example, but there's one thing I wanted to point out, which I should have mentioned earlier. There are also continuing offenses under the Companies Act. So one class of cases will be continuing offense, where directors past and present will be liable because the breach is continued. So there, merely because you've been appointed beyond a point, you can't evade liability. 138 is a peculiar offense. In 138 Negotiable Instruments Act, the liability is the failure to pay. It's not just the dishonor of check. So if you as a director fail to pay a check, which is a valid instrument, you can't escape liability. However, for certain other offenses, where the offense is committed in the past, merely because the prosecution happens later, after there's a change in the management of the company, the new set of directors can't be punished, the old will be.
So the principle of Anita Handa, can it be applied now to the corporate insolvency resolution process and the insolvency court?
That's a very interesting point, and that's been, I believe it's been considered recently in the partially in the context, it's being considered recently partially in the context of the takeover of a company. I think it's Bhushan Power.
I think there's a judgment of Rajasthan High Court also recently. Probably that may be the one.
No, I'll tell you what. I don't recall the Rajasthan High Court judgment. The point I was making was that today, what had happened was that, if I recall correctly, the Delhi High Court has dealt with it in the context possibly of Jindal Steel taking over Bhushan Power. The issue was whether the liability under PMLA will be transferred to the new entity which takes over. Or when you take over under the IBC, do you take over, deholds the liability? Because remember, PMLA has criminal liability also.
Yes.
Similarly, Tata Steel is facing liability in taking over Bhushan Steel, and similarly, all other companies are facing. So the issue of transference of liability has been dealt with by certain high courts, but not by the Supreme Court yet. It will have to be determined by the Supreme Court for two reasons. If you can't prosecute the new entity, can you or can you not prosecute the directors? According to me, in terms of the exemption under the Companies Act, in the cases of mergers, amalgamations, will allow the directors to be prosecuted.
I think by virtue
Which is not a very good thing from our perspective, because that's something which I'm arguing in one of my cases.
the IBC also seems to have brought in an amendment.
The IBC amendment is now. The IBC amendment, yes.
So, in cases of where there's a specific query with respect to the interpretation under 149(12), does the financial institution there also would include the PE funds, the private equity funds?
It uses the term financial institutions in 149.
Well,
149(12). Now, I'll tell you, there's a little catch here. According to me, the PE funds, when they put in nominees, can come under the category of non-executive directors. But the issue will be, there are PE funds which are involved in management by choice. Then they will fall within the term of whole-time director, and then they'll have a problem.
Is there a way to capture it in the agreement?
Yes, there is a way to capture it, but there is a way to capture it by saying that they'll be there only as nominees, as exercising as representatives on board and without any executive capacity, non-full-time directors, non-executive directors. Because the word uses non-executive directors. There are two categories under 149, independent, non-executive. And if you're a non-executive director and your role is that of a non-executive director, then I think you're safe.
So there's another question, which is basically why criminal liability is introduced to punish officer in default when they can be punished with removal of office and penalty. Though it is more of a legislative thing, but would you like to answer that?
Oh, I'd love to answer that. It's a very important thing. From the 1980s, as I said in the beginning of this talk, criminal law is our response to any matter which concerns society. Where we find ordinary systems don't work, we impose criminal law. I'll give you a very interesting thing. In the year 2000, about 10 years ago, I was speaking to all the law officers of SEBI in Bombay. I'd been asked to give a talk then. The legal director was then Sandeep Parekh. He was Mr. P.H. Parekh's son. So while I was speaking to them, the conversation that I had with them was because SEBI has both criminal prosecution and penal provisions. And as a matter of practice, they found the penalty provisions and the imposition of restrictions on companies which breach SEBI regulations far beneficial than criminal cases. And they had almost stopped prosecuting people except in the rarest of rare cases. That message does not seem to have gone to our legislators, and it is time that we have a serious rethink and stick to imposition of penalty or other civil consequences, such as restrictions in or stripping of office or restriction in functioning or taking appointments in companies, rather than criminal prosecutions. Criminal prosecutions, though it's very bad for my business, are tardy, are slow, and often become an engine of harassment. And that's not the way to smoothen corporate governance.
So recently we have seen a lot of Supreme Court directed prosecutions with respect to JP, Amrapali. So all these executive, non-executive, independent directors, they're all being roped in now. So in these scenarios, what is the, not specific to the JP or Amrapali, but where there is a prosecution because of fraud being committed or a media trial being conducted, and everyone is being prosecuted. What is the broader strategy for them to defend themselves in terms of how they can...
Let me clarify, because I've dealt with both the cases.
Okay.
And especially in Amrapali, I represented 3 funds. One of the funds has had trouble. Their officers are being proceeded with. They have faced action. They have been prosecuted. In the other 2, they're not, because the question was of individual culpability beyond their role as nominees of private equity. So that's one important distinction. Having said that, I think it is time for people who invest in corporations, and this is a rule which applies all over the world, to exercise due diligence. You're on a board of a company for a certain purpose, to ensure that principles of governance are not lost and to ensure that your investment is protected. You cannot be a rubber stamp on the action of the promoters. And the moment you choose to be a rubber stamp on the actions of the promoters for the sake of profiteering, you lend yourself to culpability. And therefore, independent directors, nominee directors have a great responsibility, not only to the person who they represent, but also to themselves, because the criminal law, or the law as it stands, is very stringent. So and I can tell you, in not these two cases, but in other cases, one finds that there is not even a sham of, there is not even an attempt to achieve a level of transparency in the processes of companies. And this is while you have nominees of PE funds or financial institutions sitting on the board. And this is leading to a prosecution. As I said earlier, the SFIO is a new body. Under the provision of the Companies Act, the moment they see the remotest of questionable conduct, they are prosecuting and leaving it for the courts to determine, which is a very scary thought. Out of that 287 directors in one of the companies which are officer people who are being prosecuted, 130 are natural persons. Out of those 130, there are barely 20 or 30, 20, or maybe 30 people who are part of the promoters group or promoters associates, affiliates, CFO, etc. Another 30 will be auditors, and the rest are people who've been independent directors or nominees from time to time. And people at at late ages, having retired from top of offices in government or elsewhere, are now facing criminal cases and with the danger of being locked up for a long time.
Sir, we have few more questions. Can we, like, if you have a bit, maybe I can just ask you the last question and then we can quickly run your PPT for people to record it and then we'll close it, sir.
Or you can circulate to them. I have no problem.
Right, sir. So just for the completion of the presentation, we would try and just scroll through it once so that it is there.
One last question you said?
And there are too many, sir, so I'm just trying to get to the best one which I can ask.
Why don't you do this? Run the PPT for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Just run the PPT and then we'll do the questions.
Right, sir. So I'll just ask Akash to quickly run the PPT so that...
It's really what I told you guys, and you're welcome to circulate it. If this.
We'll do that, sir. We'll do that. We'll do that. We'll do that. Akash, if you can just do that. If you can just scroll through the slides once for people to, at their luxury, they can go through it and review it.
You made me do a lot of hard work.
Thank you so much, sir. We are delighted to have you here for the session, sir. A lot of people have joined in. They've got benefited, hopefully. I'm for sure got benefited from this. And Akash is quickly running through the slides. So because of your PPT, we wanted them to get the benefit of having a look at it.
Where are these lines coming from, Akash? They're not in the original one. Akash, these lines are not there in the original one I sent you.
Just move forward, Akash, you'll not find it.
Strange. Because I checked on my laptop, they're not.
We'll email them the clear copies. We'll email everyone the clear copies. So there is one pertinent question, if I may ask.
Yeah, go ahead.
With respect to the payment of wages and non-payment thereof, and there is a critical situation that everyone is going through these times. How much and what is the liability and responsibility of the key managerial persons for non-payment, and can they be made to pay personally in any circumstances under the labor laws?
The liability to pay will be under the Minimum Wages Act and under the Industrial Disputes Act, and that liability is a serious problem currently. For that, we will have to look at the relevant provisions of those legislation which have similar provisions. Having said that, I'm given to understand that the state of UP is coming out with a 3-year waiver of certain select laws relating to industrial disputes. And the purpose for that is because with this current situation, there is no capability to pay money. And I believe that today, I've read about that just today, that matter has, I was told, been discussed with the government, and there is a serious plan to do it on a state-wise basis to provide an exemption and provide a minimum threshold of payment so that there is no exploitation of labor, at the same time providing hopefully a moratorium from criminal action and prosecutions. But that liability is legislation specific.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your valuable suggestions, advice, session. We are all, I see a lot of messages on the personal chat to us, thanking you for your session.
That's very kind.